Man, I am so stupid. I recorded this whole video, spent like 30 hours talking to my freaking camera, and then I checked the footage. All the audio levels were peaking, they were way too loud. So I deleted all of the footage, and then I remembered I'm shooting on the Rode Video Mic NTG, where it records a safety track at 20 decibels lower, but I'd forgotten that because I just got the microphone. And of course I had the feature turned on for that, but I just deleted the footage. Welcome to the video, guys. I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Ben Martin. I'm a photographer, videographer, and an American Ninja Warrior. Today we're talking about the Canon EOS R, why I bought it in 2020, and if this is the right camera for you guys. So there are a lot of things to love about this camera. There are a few things to dislike, and I'm going to talk about what those things are, if this is a safe purchase in 2020, and if this camera is relatively future-proof, and who I might recommend it to, and for what scenarios. I'm going to assume that you guys might have seen a little bit on this camera already. You guys kind of know the overall specs and general things regarding what it can do. So I don't want to bore you with kind of the basic. This is a
30.2 megapixel sensor camera taken from the 5D Mark IV. It also has dual pixel autofocus and a nasty 4K crop.
I think if you're able to take a look deeper than what the initial spec sheet says, the basic things that really push away a lot of creatives and filmmakers, once you can look past those and really start to give this camera a chance, you're gonna be really surprised and very impressed with what this camera can do. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that I don't like about this camera and really dive into the reasons why. This camera has a 30.2 megapixel sensor, fantastic for photos, not as great for low light, and that really shows in video performance. Realistically, you can't push it past 3200 ISO, or your colors start shifting and you really start seeing that ISO noise in the footage. So compared to the competition, like the Sony a7 III and even the Nikon Z6, the ISO level, you just can't push them up that high. Even though I don't like this camera's low light performance, you can certainly use some things like using a fast lens and having a low shutter speed, like 1/50th of a second, even if you are shooting in a higher frame rate. Who cares about motion blur if you have this super noisy image? And I can guarantee you 9 out of 10 people won't be able to tell the difference between a proper 180-degree shutter speed shot and something that's a little bit lower. But I wouldn't recommend going anything lower than 1/50th of a second in shutter speed, because that will kind of break that continuity with 24 frames per second footage. This camera's got a 4K crop. That doesn't really bother me, especially since there is a workaround like using a Metabone speed booster to reduce that 1.74 crop to a 1.24 crop. That's a nice little trick that you guys can do. Please wait to buy the speed booster unless you absolutely need it right now. One, you want to wait for the EOS R5 and the R6 specs to be announced, because then we can see if it's going to have any 4K crop or not. So that's going to determine whether or not getting that speed booster for $500-ish is going to be a valuable investment, and if you can carry it over to future cameras. However, if you do have your eyes on the Red Dragon Komodo, that is going to have some sort of a crop to it. So maybe getting that speed booster is going to be valuable if you plan on getting that camera in the future. But reason number two is because Viltrox or another speed booster fourth party company might be coming out with a cheaper speed booster as well. And I've used some of Viltrox's speed boosters. Fantastic. The autofocus is near perfect. There might be some advantages to Metabones, but for me, it's not really worth that extra $350-ish. What does bother me in the 4K mode is, one, that you can't shoot 4K 60, two, that you can't shoot internally in 10-bit 422 color, that you have to use an external recorder to get that. I mean, the GH5 can do it. That's a pretty old camera, so Canon really has no excuse as to why they didn't put that in the EOS R, so that's kind of frustrating. Hopefully they do address that and fix that for the EOS R5 and or the R6. And with that, when you're using an external recorder, you can't shoot 1080p at 10-bit 422, so you can't get any full frame 10-bit color. And then my last gripe about their 4K mode is the rolling shutter. It's pretty terrible. That's that jello effect. When you pan the camera side to side, it'll start looking like this. And the whole world gets pretty crazy on you. For shooting and video, those are kind of the main things that I don't like. One other thing is with their custom profile settings that you can set in this camera. If you're shooting video and you have the audio sound recording set to manual, the level that you originally select and set that setting to, it's going to be the same level every single time you turn it on. So if you have different microphones and you would need different decibel levels on the gain in the camera, it really doesn't care. Like if you turn off the camera or if you shift it to a different mode and come back, it's going to reset that manual audio mode to whatever it was originally. So that's why I don't really use the video presets, I guess, in this camera. I guess those kind of settings are kind of useful for slow motion and for time lapses. And I guess if you're shooting a silent film, you can have a silent film preset mode. Okay, those are the main things that I don't like about it. There are a lot more to like and enjoy about this camera. So yes, it is a little disappointing that this camera doesn't have in-body image stabilization, the IBIS, where the sensor shifts around. It does have electronic image stabilization, so that's happening kind of computationally inside the camera. Not a huge deal to me because when I want smooth shots, I will be shooting on a gimbal, and cinema cameras don't have in-body image stabilization, except the new Canon C500 Mark II does have the electronic stabilization, and people are loving it. So when Canon puts it on a cinema camera, people love it. And when they throw it in their more entry-level mirrorless body, the internet just wants to tear apart this camera. I guess that was initially, now people kind of love it, so that's not really a problem anymore. And I certainly do fall under that camp of someone who loves this camera. Now we're gonna talk about some of the great things that I really do enjoy about it. First off is just the form factor. Prior to this camera, I shot on the Canon EOS RP, which is basically just the little brother version of it. It's slightly newer, but it's not better by any means. So it's a little bit smaller in the hand, but the grip is nice and comfortable in the RP. But when I held this camera at National Camera Exchange, when the clerk handed it over to me and I picked it up, I was like, wow, this feels completely different. And don't worry, I will be doing a comparison video of the RP and the EOS R in the next week or two. But the grip just feels really comfortable. It sits nice and deep in the hand. You have room for all of your fingers to fit without needing an extension of a grip or a battery grip. So yeah, Canon really hit the ball out of the park with their body design. This is probably one of my favorite camera bodies that I've ever held. And in my opinion, it's even better to hold than the 5D Mark IV. So yeah, they made a really comfortable, sleek, and lightweight design. So moving on from the physical aspects of this camera, the vanities, we're going to talk about some of the internals and the specs. One thing I like, having C-Log built in, as opposed to the Canon 5D Mark IV. You got to ship it back, pay $100, and then they'll ship it to you with C-Log installed. Now the Canon EOS R uses C-Log 1. Currently there are 3 C-Log profiles that Canon cinema cameras can have. C-Log 1 being the least flat, C-Log 2 and 3 being much more flat and having a little bit more dynamic range. So ideally EOS R5, hopefully that has C-Log 2 or 3. I doubt it will, because that's kind of a more higher end feature that Canon might be wanting to reserve for their cinema cameras, which I totally understand, and we will be totally fine without C-Log 2 and 3 on the EOS R. So yeah, C-Log 1 is a dream to work with. It's very simple to grade. I'm really grateful that this camera has the all-eye codecs. It's got a ton of codec options, and being able to shoot at the highest bitrate is super helpful, because then it gives you more flexibility and it gives you more quality overall. One little misconception that I fall ill to was the whole megabytes per second on an SD card versus the megabits per second in a camera. So this camera at a max in 4K with the all-eye codec on can shoot at 480 megabits per second. That sounds pretty insane. So I thought I had to have a SD card that could read at 480 megabytes per second. That's where I messed it up, because on SD cards it shows you megabytes per second. So capital MB stands for megabytes, and that's very different from megabits, because there are 8 megabits in 1 megabyte. Would have been nice to know earlier before I bought a bunch of SD cards, but at least I have high quality, fast reading SD cards. At a minimum, you need to have an SD card that can write, not read, which is what is usually only advertised on SD cards unless you get the Sony cards. You gotta have a card that can write at least 60 megabytes per second if you want to be shooting in 4K all-eye. For me, I don't think I'll be using this camera for 4K very much at all, unless I need a little bit extra reach or punching in. I have been considering getting an external recorder to get that 10-bit 422 colors, which would, I guess, necessitate me to shoot in 4K, but I think I'm gonna hold off and wait to see if the EOS R5 or R6 can shoot 10-bit internally, because if they can shoot 10-bit internally, there's not really a huge need for me to get an external recorder. I would just have to upgrade in the future. Camera's autofocus, it works great. It's better than Sony, yes. I know that some YouTubers, one in particular, the Everyday Dad, really preaches about Sony having the best autofocus in the game, but that's just not it. That's not true. I think with some firmware updates and some time and care spent to the autofocus system, Canon has really perfected it and made it the best on the market. One thing that, it's not one thing I like, but one thing that I'm okay with is having a single SD card slot. I'm sure you guys have heard of this with this camera. I don't really care, because most modern day SD cards, you buy them new, don't buy SD cards used. If you buy the SD card new from a reliable brand, and if it's a UHS-2 class speed card, you should be pretty set. And one thing that I do for my really important shoots with clients, I like to cycle out SD cards and use newer cards for the important stuff and use some older UHS-1 cards for the less important things, and especially for these talking head videos. I have not had a card failure. I have had one of the locking mechanisms break off of my card, and I lost the locking mechanism because I threw it away. But apparently if that happens to you, you can attach it back on with some sort of adhesive, and it will make the card function again. At least you can get your footage off of it and store it in a safe place. Another big plus about this camera lies in its versatility, just being able to use it for so many different things if you're taking photos. And within that, you can take photos for a wide variety of different events. And if you flip it over to the video side, you've got even more options. You can do event videography, you can do talking head interviews, documentaries, wedding films, short films, feature films. You can just do so much, YouTube videos. I do think that this camera, its strongest suit is in making content like this and vlogs. I think that's where its strengths really lie, but certainly can be used for other professional work. Which is why I got it, because I'm planning to be shooting a bunch of weddings this summer exclusively on this camera. Now yeah, I probably should have started with this, but the reason why I don't have the EOS R in my hand is because we're shooting on it right now. Battery life in this camera is phenomenal. I've been shooting, literally recording for about an hour straight without charging the battery, and it looks like we've only lost like one of the small bars of battery, so it's performing really well. I really don't think there's a need to have a battery grip unless you're shooting photos where you need to have that vertical option, and comfort is going to be an issue for those long periods of time where you're taking photos like that. But I don't think for me I'll be picking up the battery grip just because there aren't any good third-party options out there, which you probably shouldn't, and that the native Canon one costs over 200 bucks. Yeah, overall, I think this camera has a lot of potential. There's a lot of room to expand it and to really push its capabilities, like using the speed booster with it, throwing on an external monitor. There are so many things that you can do to really buff up what this camera is capable of, and I think that's a fantastic thing. It does really add some extra hidden costs, but again, if you're a pro shooter, that's something you gotta be willing to do. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Next week or in the following week, we're gonna be shooting a video comparing this one to the Canon EOS RP, so stay tuned for that. I'm excited to talk about some of the differences and points of similarities with those. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, throw some questions or comments in the section below, and we will see you in the next video, and thank you for spending this time with me.